in just a few weeks here on either supporting a ticket that wants to create jobs and bolster our economy and win the war, or you're going to be supporting a ticket that wants to increase taxes, which ultimately kills jobs and is going to hurt our economy.
We're back from WashU, as they call it, Washington University in St. Louis, one of the great universities in the country. We're talking about tonight's big vice presidential debate that's just been over. Let's look at these numbers from a CBS poll out tonight after the debate. It's among uncommitted voters. 53% of those surveyed say they now have a better impression of Biden. 5% say they have a worse opinion of him. 55% say they now have a better opinion of Palin. So it was a good night relatively for both of them. 14% say they have a worse opinion of her. After the debate, catch this number. I've never seen a number like this. 98% see Biden as knowledgeable about important issues. I've never seen anything like that. It may be superfluous, though, because his opponent is 79% seem to be having all the knowledge necessary to be vice president. 66% say Palin, as knowledgeable about important issues, up from 43%. That was Biden, up from 79%. So they're both certainly in the winning category in terms of knowledge now. 97% say Biden is prepared for the VP job, up from 81% free debate. 55% Palin. Now, this is a much more narrower verdict here. 55%, a significant but not great majority, say Palin is now prepared for the job, up from 39%. New York Times' John Harwood is also CNBC's chief watchdog. Well, that's a lot of information. Rachel Maddow is joining us as well. This is amazing. Of course, host of the vastly successful Rachel Maddow show. Let me ask you both about these numbers. What do they tell you? Rachel first.
It's interesting to see the same sort of size rise for the two of them, both of them getting a 16-point boost in the proportion of voters in that last item who see that they are prepared to be vice president. Obviously, I'd rather be Joe Biden looking at those figures than be Sarah Palin looking at those figures. But I think that matches the general feeling that we're getting tonight, which is that neither of them did themselves any real harm, and they both probably did themselves a little bit of good. And the campaign goes on almost as if this debate didn't happen.
John.
Did she do herself some good tonight? You betcha. But I think that there's only some...
You're like her. You ask the question, you answer it.
Well, doggone it. That's what I'm going to do.
Doggone it. Darn it. Darn it. Let's all talk like Sarah Palin.
Darn right I'm going to do that.
You know, we can do better, you know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Look, I think she stopped her own bleeding tonight. The question is, did she stop John McCain's? And I think that is much less clear. He's had a terrible couple of weeks with the economy. And one thing I think is interesting, as charming as she was at points of the debate, she was attacking without being mean or snarky like she sometimes came across in the convention speech, though partisans loved it. I thought there was one fundamental incoherence in her argument related to the economic crisis, okay? When she came out and was talking about that, she said, well, there was no oversight, Wall Street ran wild, and the Mavericks are going to come to town, and somehow it's going to be different. And then she spent much of the rest of the debate saying, you know what, government has to get out of the way. It was totally at odds with the two arguments were at odds with each other. And so that went to the point of Sarah Palin having difficulty explaining to people exactly what maverick means in this context. What are you going to do with it? Right. How are you going to be different from George W. Bush? And Biden hammered that. Joe Biden was subdued. I think he followed the advice maybe more than some Democrats wanted of dialing it back and not being overbearing.
Do you think he was a little bit too dialed back?
Well, I think there were points where he was a little too dialed back, maybe a little too Senate insider-ish, and that helped her make the argument that we're going to bring change. But on the substance, you got to consider two arguments. He came out and said John McCain is just like George Bush. That is an argument that, if you look at the polls right now, is doing very well with the American public. And she came back and said, oh, that's looking backwards, that's partisan, we represent change. How do those two stack up? If you look at where we stand right now, it looks like Biden's has more appeal out there.
Rachel, let's push the story to tomorrow night. I bet that tomorrow night's big story, when we're both on the air, is not going to be the debate tonight. It's going to be the fact that the markets have discounted an $810 billion outlay by the Congress approved tomorrow. They've already discounted it, and they know it's not enough to stop this big recession that's coming. Jack Welch said the fourth quarter of this year is going to be miserable. It's going to be a huge negative growth for the economy. Is the coming of a huge depression, well, I'll call it recession. We don't know what it's going to look like. A bigger story than anything right now politically.
Yes, and the short-term political impact is actually about the conservative base. There has yet to be, I think, yet to be articulated a coherent Republican approach toward the economic bailout or toward the economic crisis. But you are starting to see on the right flank in the House and in talk radio and in conservative intellectual circles a real rejection of the whole idea of a bailout. John McCain stepping up to it, and Republicans in the House presumably voting for it tomorrow is going to create a little bit of trouble in the base. And if the House votes it down again, John McCain's going to have a huge problem with the base, because that's going to be a lot of energy for the anti-bailout populist right-wing forces in that party.
Well, if we're about to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel, one of these candidates has got to come up with a much bigger barrel. Anyway, thank you, John Harwood. Thank you, Rachel Maddow.